Hello, career competitor. This is Steve Meller, as always, here to share with you some powerful conversation and some significant insights into what it means to optimize your career in pursuit of your optimal self. I am excited to be introducing our guest here shortly. But as always, let me draw your attention to careercompetitor.com, where you'll see right at the top of that homepage is a place where you can enter your email and become a part of my monthly subscription, my mid-monthly message, where I am just simply giving you that little nudge in the middle of the month to remember that whatever it was you set out to achieve with all that energy at the outset of the month and whatever those lofty goals may be at the end of the month, that you're not going to lose sight of that journey in between. Become a part of my community today. Head to careercompetitor.com, enter your email, and look forward to my next mid-monthly message. Now, let's get right into the show. Hello there and welcome in to this episode of Career Competitor, where I am so excited to be welcoming in Doug Noll for this, what I believe, truly unique episode of Career Competitor. So excited to dive into a number of areas here with Doug, but firstly, let me shed some light on where we're going to be going with this conversation. We're going to start out by discussing the possibilities that are out there when you follow your heart. Secondly, we're going to cover how we can communicate more effectively when we focus more on the emotions of another person versus the words that they're actually using. And finally, we're going to learn from Doug why serving others might just be the greatest way to measure the success that we have in our lives. So these three things, so much more within, like I said, this very unique and truly powerful episode of Career Competitor, and I hope you all enjoy. Okay, our career competitor today is an award-winning author, speaker, and trainer. After 22 years as a trial lawyer, our guest became a peacemaker and mediator, today helping people solve deep and intractable conflicts and teaching others to do the same. To highlight the magnitude of their work, our guest is the co-founder of the award-winning Prison of Peace Project, where they have taught murderers in maximum security prisons to be peacemakers and mediators. Our guest has written 4 books, the latest of which was released in September 20, entitled De-escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less, which I happen to be currently binge listening to on audio. And he also offers online video courses on legal negotiations and emotional de-escalation. As if he's not busy enough professionally, our guest happens to be a jazz violinist, aircraft and helicopter pilot, ski instructor, second-degree black belt, Tai Chi master, and whitewater rafter. It's fair to say that we're in for a treat today, folks. So let's welcome into career competitor, Mr. Doug Noll. Doug, how are we doing, brother?
I'm doing great, Steve. That's quite the introduction.
It is. And what's crazy is that that's not even all of it. I could have given you more. You more, man. So you've been busy. You've been busy.
It's kind of amazing if you just put your mind to stuff over a lifetime. It's amazing what you can accomplish. It really is.
Yeah, what a wonderful segue, actually, just to kind of get us started here, because we spoke briefly on the phone a few weeks ago. I've really been looking forward to this. And again, as I alluded to there, I've been listening to the book, already learning a whole bunch, which I'll probably get to at some point here later on. But, you know, for you to say that, to put your mind to something, it can be amazing what comes of that. And as people would have heard there in the introduction, trial lawyer turned peacemaker. So let's take the essence of that insight that you just provided there. When was it in your journey that you decided I've got something different that I want to put my mind towards? And how did that transition maybe start to transpire over that time?
So it wasn't something that happened overnight. Just by way of background, I grew up in Southern California, went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, then came back to California, went to law school, and moved to Central California to become a clerk for a fellow judge for a year, and then went into private practice. As a young lawyer in a firm, tried my first jury trial 6 weeks after joining the firm. So I jumped right into it.
Yeah.
In the mid-'80s, I took up the martial arts. I was awarded my second degree black belt right around my 40th birthday in 1990. And then my teacher told me to start studying Tai Chi. And Tai Chi has two really interesting paradoxes. The first is the softer you are, the stronger you are. And the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. Did not compute. But I continued to practice Tai Chi. Eventually, you never mastered Tai Chi, but I got pretty good at it as a martial art. I didn't study it as a contemplative practice. I was studying it as a martial art. Some years later, I was in a courtroom and cross-examining somebody, and the thought came to me, what the heck am I doing in here? And at that point, I realized that this paradox had finally manifested in my life. So on that, right after that trial, I had a river trip plan with a bunch of friends up in Idaho. I spent 10 days on the main salmon and thought about how many people I'd really served as a trial lawyer over the past 20 plus years. And I could only count 5 people that I thought really came out of the system better than going in. I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I want to go another 20 or 30 years and only serve 10 or 15 people. That's not what my life is about. Had no idea what I wanted to do. So I came back to town. I lived up in the mountains in northeast Fresno County, California, and drove down into town to my office. And I heard the one and only, it was really literally the one and only public service announcement for a new master's degree program in peacemaking and conflict studies being offered at Fresno Pacific University. And so I went to the orientation, and there was a lawyer there who was on the faculty, and he saw me come in, and he said, "What are you doing here?" You're the last person I'd expect to walk through the door. And I said, well, Dwayne, I'm just kind of interested in what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
And I ended up enrolling. And for 3 years, I was a full-time master's degree student, basically a 3/4 time law professor and a full-time trial lawyer. That program with my professor, my mentors, completely shifted my worldview on what conflict is all about. And I began to understand the limitations of the law, why people hate lawyers, why the legal system is being asked to solve conflicts it's not designed to solve, and people essentially don't have the capacity to solve conflicts on their own. And so the only institution out there that deals with conflict is the legal system. And it's not designed to deal with these kinds of conflicts.
Yeah.
So make a long story short, I left the practice, left $10 million on the table, walked out with a week's worth of notice in 2000, and then on November 1st, 2000, opened up my own practice as a mediator and a peacemaker. And never looked back. That's the decision I made.
Well, it's one of those, from the outside looking in, I'm sure there's people, and just so you know, without knowing much about my story, we have some similarities. We may have made those decisions in very different industries and career paths, but very similar story of that moment of just pure awakening and not necessarily knowing why it took so long to kind of see that. But because I'm certainly picking that up from you as well. But I think interestingly here, from the outside looking in, someone sees that decision back in 2000. They go, "Whoa, what are you doing? Like, what's happening here?" And it looks like you're doing something rash. When you tell that story, nothing about it is rash. It's all been figured out over a series of decisions and commitments over so many years for you to go from what I heard you there say, like late 80s, 90s, really starting to get more committed to the martial arts, and then to finally make a commitment like that almost, over a decade later. I think what I'm hearing here that I think can really serve our listeners is that when you do put your mind to something, to be patient about it at the same time, because we do live in this environment of quick return, right? And so something I'm hearing right away here, Doug, is that not only did you decide to put your mind to something, but my gosh, you were really patient about the fruits that maybe came from that process as well.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, that's something that I learned a long time ago. I was born with a lot of disabilities, and in order to fight through those disabilities, I had to learn patience and discipline. I didn't have a specific goal in mind. I was just following my heart. And so from Tai Chi to getting my master's degree, to quitting the practice of law, to becoming a peacemaker, I was just following where I thought I would be of the most service. I had no idea what was going to happen. I did everything I told my clients never to do, right? No
Right.
business plan, no savings. We own nothing.
Yeah.
Just go out and do it, make it happen. That's what I did. And, it turned out to be a really great decision. I don't make nearly as much money as I used to make as a lawyer, but you learn that it's not that the money's not important.
Yeah.
What's important is service to others.
And well, I was just going to say, in that story right there, I'm immediately hearing as well how you had to redefine what success looks like, right?
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I there's so many people, so many lawyers I know who I've done for 40 years, and they're dried up husks and not happy, and maybe they're on their third marriage, and they've never really found true happiness. They just define themselves by their profession, by being a lawyer. And I wasn't willing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that, again, so my background was the world of competitive sports. So I came from collegiate swimming, and I see it a lot in that world, husbands, wives that are gone from spouses for weeks upon months at a time throughout a season, in many ways estranged from being able to raise children the way they potentially could, and usually taking it out on themselves, carrying a lot of that themselves, whether it be just the way they look after themselves, they dismiss the need to, prioritize themselves, whatever it might be. And for me, coming from that world, I see a lot of the similar things that you're referencing here in the legal system as well. And the reason why I'm actually highlighting that is that for you to then be able to notice this within yourself, you obviously utilized a lot of that experience and some of those teachings that were happening within the martial arts. But I'm just curious as well, how were you able to truly find that realization despite all that potential distraction that could have easily pulled you away? Even upon that realization, you still could have been pulled back in. And I'm sure one or two folks maybe even tried. I'm just curious, in that moment, how were you able to be disciplined and diligent enough to say, listen, this environment is no longer what I want, and despite not having that clear goal or destination, I do know I need a change, and I'm going to commit to it?
In the very first class of my master's degree program, I was in a week-long workshop. And in the second day of the workshop, I realized this is where I have to be. And I went back to the law firm, and I went to the firm manager, and I said, John, I need some new business cards. And I've taken people who aren't business cards anymore, but they did. And it said, Douglas E. Noll, and underneath attorney at law. And in a blue pen, I scratched the attorney at law and put peacemaker. And John turned white. So I can't do that. Of course he could, but I can't do that. I was a senior partner in the firm. What do you mean you can't do that? And when he said, I can't do that, and he gave me pushback, after what I had just gone through that day, that huge transformation, I said, I'm done. This is it. I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but it's not going to be long. That was in 1998.
Mm-hmm.
So I lasted 2 years. But that was the beginning of the end. It was so obvious. I mean, and, it was a lot of things. I mean, I didn't feel like it was being treated fairly by the firm in terms of compensation. I felt there was a lot of injustice, a lot of favoritism, a lot of nepotism. And so there were a lot of things building that when I decided to leave, it was really a pretty easy decision. I mean, It was a simple decision. It was effortless.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And something I definitely want to touch on now is, for a lot of people, because we've probably had people on the show that have come on and said the importance of goal setting, the importance of knowing the destination. And here you are saying, like, hey, I made the biggest commitment of my life without any of that. Yeah, without any of that.
Exactly.
And hey, we are an unbiased podcast. This is not a place where I stand on one side and say this is the absolute right way of doing things. I think the best thing about this podcast is that we have such a diverse insight of ways of getting there, and you finding the way that works best for you, not necessarily it being the right way for everybody. So I'm just curious, when you look at that transition and some of those early years of really finding your way in those early 2000s and figuring this thing out, how effective was it there early on for you to be able to say, listen, without the goal, without the journey, without the destination necessarily mapped out, I'm just going to follow my heart and see what comes of this?
Well, it wasn't easy in the beginning. I still had a lot of personal growth to go through. You just don't go from being a hardcore trial lawyer and suddenly black belt to becoming a peacemaker.
Right.
There's no switch you flip for that. It's a growth process that you have to go through. So I had to go through the growth process. And also I had a I had an excellent reputation, but as a really fierce, highly ethical, but very fierce, tough trial lawyer. And people were having a hard time getting their heads around the idea that here's a guy who takes names, kicks butt, and now he's a peacemaker. Huh? No way.
Yeah.
And so it took a few years to do that, but I got a break and was able to work on a very large dispute, a real estate partnership, and the case settled. And I got some credit for that. And that's really how things sort of kicked off. And people realized, wow, we all knew you were smart, but to be able to take those personalities and help them come to a settlement, that's pretty impressive. So that's how that started. And, it's like any other practice. I mean, when you leave the practice of law to become a mediator, you're basically starting at the bottom again. And most people that do this do it around my age. I started around 50. And so it's a process. It's just basically starting over and working on it. Now, my career took a little bit of a different turn than my mediator colleagues. In 2005, as you probably read in the book, I discovered through an epiphany a really powerful way to de-escalate angry people. 2 years later, Matthew Lieberman's lab at UCLA came out with a brain scanning study that showed why this technique called affect labeling works. And it was completely a game changer for me. As I learned it and developed it, took a long time to get it nailed down, but as I developed it, I finally was able to be able to teach it and show people that how you can calm any angry person in 90 seconds or less. You can stop fights and arguments in your life forever. I mean, Steve, imagine never having another fight or argument again.
Hard to imagine.
I can teach you how to do that. It's a skill set.
Yeah.
And that led to the Prison of Peace project you mentioned earlier in 2010. So from 2010 to 2020, when the pandemic hit, I was spending the bulk of my time working in maximum security prisons here in California and also in Connecticut, training people serving life and long-term sentences how to stop prison violence. And the foundation skill we taught them was this basic listening to emotion skill. So that was also totally unforeseen. It just happened. But it was again one of those life-changing moments where you're walking into the belly of the beast and having an effect on human lives in, absolutely transformational ways. It was amazing.
Yeah, I would love for you to, because this was something that just enlightened me in ways as I first started out with the book. The definitions and just the origin of this affect labeling. I'd love to go into a little bit more detail around that in just a moment, though, because one thing I do want to reference here, and it comes up all the time in my work now, in my coaching, is that there's for me, while it may seem from the outside looking in again as though it's almost like, wow, look at the way things kind of fell into place with you as you started to work on some of these things there in 2010, etc. The one thing I always tell clients is that, hey, when we open ourselves up to these opportunities, it's crazy how they just suddenly come our way. I had this conversation yesterday with a client who he threw this crazy idea out about 3 or 4 sessions ago. And lo and behold, an opportunity to move a step closer to that crazy goal suddenly came out of the woodwork from somewhere. And it's like, he acted surprised. And I said, nothing about this is surprising because you're opening yourself up to the opportunity. And I'm hearing that in abundance already in your story, Doug.
Right. And you never know. And now I look back on it and the Prison of Peace project turns out to be one of my great legacies.
Yeah.
And it's still active in California and Connecticut prisons. It's overseas. It's in Europe. And it's gone international. And it's kind of amazing how it, but we had no idea when we started this thing, Laurel Poffer and I, when we started this at the largest, most violent women's prison in the world in 2010, we had no idea where this was going to go.
Yeah.
So you can look back and in hindsight, give you all this, wow, look at how all that evolved. But in the moment, I had no clue.
Yeah.
I had no idea where it was going to go.
But you remained open to it. There's no
That's
doubt.
right. And this is great work. We're doing amazing work. We're affecting thousands of lives. And so let's just do it and see what happens.
Yeah. So I want to now touch on affect labeling because for me, one thing I'm always looking to do with every guest that comes on is how can you maybe leave us those one or two nuggets that actually give folks a competitive advantage in their particular worlds. And there's no doubt, the moment I heard you go into the origin and the explanation of affect labeling, I said, we are touching on this when he comes on the pod. So I'm excited to get to this point now. So please give us some background and certainly some definition around this term.
Affect labeling is a technical term. It's been around for a while, but it has not gotten a lot of traction. What has happened, everybody's heard of active listening. Mm-hmm. Active listening was a term created by a psychologist by the name of Gordon Thomas. I think it's either Thomas Gordon or Gordon Thomas. I can't remember. Back at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, back in the 50s. And the first use of the word active listening is in Carl Rogers' last book, which was a book on looking at where positive psychology was going, applying psychology. Gordon Thomas wrote, and I think it was Thomas Gordon wrote a chapter on active listening. And Rogers was not so interested in listening. But his student, his protege, Gordon was a PhD student, a mentee of Rogers. He got interested in listening. So he formulated this way of listening. And it's the first time anybody's really formalized that. But unfortunately, the human growth potential movement, which started right about then and really exploded in the 60s, took his work and completely misconstrued it. So you have this formula, what I hear you saying is X, or what I feel you're feeling is X, or what I think you're feeling is X. And we all know when somebody uses that on us, that it doesn't work. It never has worked. It never will work. It's wrong. And there's no science to support it. Somewhere along the line, somebody started developing these concepts of affect labeling. Now, I have not been able to figure out where that started, where it came from. But the idea of affect labeling is you don't use an I statement. You use a you statement. And the way we teach it in Prison of Peace and the way I teach it and coach it with all my clients is to say that the goal here is to make the speaker feel heard from the speaker's frame of reference. So the only way you can do that is using a you statement. And what affect labeling is, it's a 3-step process. Number one, you're dealing with somebody who's really upset. They could be angry, sad, anxious, fearful, disgusted, nauseated, humiliated, whatever it might be. And you ignore their words. You are not going to listen to them. That just becomes white noise. And the reason that you ignore the words is because, number one, you're not going to get triggered if you ignore the words. And number two, you're going to free up bandwidth in your brain for doing the next 2 steps. Step number 2 is to read the emotions. And that's really easy to do because we were hardwired for it. The problem is that for 4,000 years, we've lived in a culture that has despised emotions. I mean, you go back as far back as Plato, and even before Plato, philosophers were saying emotions are bad. The highest good is rationality. Well, it turns out there's no such thing as rationality. I have yet to find somebody give me a good definition of rationality. And I teach a graduate course at Pepperdine called Decision Making Under Stress and Uncertainty. And the first thing I ask my students is, so what does it mean to be rational? And if you read all the textbooks in the area of judgment and decision making, they all say there is no such thing as rationality. And what neuroscience taught us is that we are not rational beings. So Aristotle was wrong. We are emotion beings. Every decision we make is an emotional decision. And through evolutionary biology, which I don't have time to get into right now unless you want to go there, we developed an innate skill over millions of years to be able to read each other's emotions long before Homo sapiens developed the ability to speak. We only developed the ability to speak and have vocabulary in speech 230,000 years ago. Well, how did we communicate before that? Through emotions. So we have an innate ability to read each other's emotions if we just allow ourselves to do it. And then the third step, and this is the key, the third step is to reflect back the speaker's emotions with the you statement. With no commentary, no judgment, no criticism, just flat statement. So I would say, so Steve, man, you are really pissed off. Mm-hmm. You feel completely disrespected. You don't feel heard. You feel unsupported and unappreciated. And you're worried and anxious and concerned. And this situation really horrifies you. You've been humiliated. the whole thing makes you really sad because you feel disconnected and you feel helpless and hopeless and depressed. And at the end of the day, you feel completely abandoned and rejected and betrayed, and you feel unloved and unlovable. And what I did there, there's a very specific way that you do this. And I did that very specific way. But basically, emotions are what are known as unstructured data until I train you.
Mm-hmm.
Emotions are unstructured data. So it's very hard for us to associate somebody's emotional experience and be able to reflect it back because we're not good at doing that. So I structure emotions, negative emotions, in 7 layers. So the first layer is anger, then disrespect, then fear, then disgust, then shame, humiliation, sadness, and abandonment. And basically, you work your way through the layers, just like I did. And if you go back and listen to this that I just did, you would see that I followed the layers and I went down. And you affect label somebody till they give you 4 autonomic relaxation responses: a nodding of the head, a verbal response like, yeah, a dropping of the shoulders, and a sigh of relief.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't even know they're going to do this. But at that point in time, you have calmed them down. And it works on every human brain on the planet because we're all hardwired for it.
Yes.
So you can use this skill of affect labeling to de-escalate any angry person. You can use it to prevent fights and arguments from occurring in the first place. You can use it, for example, in coaching to build rapport, to make a client feel heard. You can use it in sales to build rapport and instant trust and loyalty with a prospect. It's universal in terms of its potentiality to change lives.
Yep. And right there, folks, is the connection to the competitive advantage of using this sort of thing. And again, I say that with complete ethical underlining there too, is that there's so much of what this is about that true, authentic human behavior. I had to share this with you because that when you listen to a book, you don't really get the contents of each chapter, and so as you were explaining, as your wife, I came to find that out before we got recording, your wife is the voice on the book. So as she was explaining affect labeling to me, my mind as a parent of a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old immediately went to, my gosh, like how useful could this be in parenting? And lo and behold, one of the next, if not the next chapter, but certainly a chapter soon after that, is how this can benefit parenting. And Doug, I'll tell you this, man, I used it this weekend with my 3-year-old son, as he came in and older sister had done something that really bothered him. And I looked at my wife because she didn't know I was listening to this book. And I said, listen, Britt, if you don't mind, I'm just going to try something here that I'm learning about right now. And I want to use our children as an example. And I did exactly what you just did, Doug. And I tell you, I swear on my life that my son looked at me, he sighed, he said yes a couple times, his shoulders dropped. And then, because it was bath time, he calmly got himself undressed, hopped in the bath, and we just moved on. And it was Doug. I was really excited to tell you this, and because it blew my mind. And my wife kind of gave me this look of like, "What just happened? What just happened?"
It is. I have had that story repeated to me from thousands of times.
I can imagine. Yeah.
There are a great series of studies that show that when you affect label your children, starting at 2 or 3, by the time they're 12, they're academically 2 grade levels ahead of their peers, and they have the emotional maturity of an average 21-year-old at 12 years old.
Wow.
And there's some really interesting research that shows that cognitive development and emotional development go hand in hand. But most kids learn that they live in an emotionally unsafe world between 6 and 8 years old, and they shut down. And their emotional development stops. Cognitive development keeps going, but really, and they get really good at hiding the lack of emotional development. Sometimes it's called imposter syndrome. And it's just because they're emotionally undeveloped, because their parents didn't know how to create an emotionally safe place for them. But when you do what you just did with your 3-year-old boy, and you do it on a regular basis, like every time there's an upset, you label as emotion. Number one, he's going to get a lot less upset. I've had parents email me and say their 2-year-old stopped tantrums after 4 months of affect. They ran a tantrum again. You will see the change, and it will be phenomenal and transformational.
Yep. I believe it. And there's a point you're getting to here that I can't help but pretty much jump out at this point. It's this notion of there's a common theme in this work that you do, which is that of high stakes or high intensity. You know, whether it be the work in the prisons,
Right.
depending on the night in my house, it feels high stakes.
That's right.
It feels like that, you know. And so for me, I think that is something that has to be, again, underlined and emphasized here, is that while, to your point, whether it be sales or coaching, and I've had a few coaching sessions this week and my mind's gone to, would this be a good time to affect label? And again, for me, it's about getting those reps. And the one thing you'll learn with me, Doug, real quick, is when I get hooked on something I feel is effective, I don't really give myself much time to sort of figure it out. I just start applying it. And that's what I'm already feeling towards this work. But I just want you to maybe speak to the importance of the context of how we apply this too, because that isn't lost on me, is this notion of the high stakes, high intensity, and maybe speak a little bit as well to that awareness, because you touched on that there. It's like the more you think to use it, and that's the challenge, right? It's to not automatically fall into, you know, in that case of my son, of just being like, okay, let's pull your sister in and let's have this out and let's have a discussion, to actually commit and remain consistently disciplined towards this way of doing it. I would love for you to maybe just reference a few things here.
Here's what I've discovered. In the beginning, affect labeling is a little bit difficult to do because it's kind of weird telling somebody else what they feel. It's counterintuitive and counternormative. So everything we think we know about conversation and everything we think we know about emotions and that sort of thing. So it violates all the rules that society, culture is set up around conversation. So we have to have the courage to overcome our reticence. And as I tell my students, listening is not conversation. Listening is listening, and it has its own set of rules that are completely different from the rules of conversation. But to answer your question, what happens is as you begin to practice this, and it doesn't take long to master it. Most of my students can get it in 6 to 8 weeks. It becomes a self-affirming practice. Because when you see your little 3-year-old go through the 4 autonomic responses, and he says, yeah, and he takes off his clothes and jumps in the bath, no muss, no fuss, you say, holy shit, that's amazing.
Right.
And you feel really good inside.
Yep.
Wow, I did something really cool.
Right.
And you'll start getting feedback from people that say, thank you for listening to me. Thank you. You really understand me. I really feel heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so the practice becomes self-affirming. And the more you do it, the more you want to do it. Because you produce so much good in the world. And what I tell my students is, every time you affect label, you're throwing a pebble in the pond of peace. It costs you nothing to do it. It takes you no time, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 10 seconds. And imagine what would happen if everybody was throwing a pebble in the pond of peace every day and every minute. We'd have a tsunami of peace. We'd have a different world.
Yeah.
All from this simple idea of how we listen to people.
Yeah. It's that's a big undertaking, is all of us taking that responsibility. But that again, Doug, that's why I gravitate towards your story, and again, so excited to have you on the show too, is you're making a huge ask of society, and that in itself is, you know, the genesis of this show is about competitive mindset and just being a competitor. And I can't help but even just ask a little bit about that competitive side of you, because this is no simple task that you've taken on these last 2.5 decades. And so I'm just curious from you, when you think about success, when you think about being competitively motivated to continue to do this work, what is it that's giving you that fuel to keep encouraging so many as you are, to keep throwing those pebbles and believing that people are capable of following through and throwing those pebbles?
I have a couple of thoughts that are flowing through my head. First of all, like you, I was a competitive swimmer and a water polo player. And as a lawyer, of course, I was extremely competitive to a fault.
I've been there.
What I've learned since then, and maybe this just comes with life, and is that competition has a place, but it is not how we should define our lives. Because when there's competition, there's a winner and a loser. So when I go into sales organizations, for example, I said, how many do you do sales contests here? Yeah. I said, really? So you're going to have one winner and 49 losers. You're developing 49 losers in the sales competition. Why are you doing that? We seem to think that competition is a way of pushing people to strive harder when it's not. And people are not motivated to be competitive. They can be motivated if a competition is in a game or a sport. That's very different than in life. Because in any game or sport, there are boundaries around the activity. There are rules about tell us how we're going to score. Let's look at football, for example. All right, so we know that the field is defined. The playing time is defined. There are all kinds of rules that are defined. We have umpires out on the field, referees, who are enforcing the rules and calling infractions. And when the time is up, the team with the biggest score wins. That's a competition. Yeah. But if you take away all of those boundaries, all of those rules, take away all of the umpires, all of the referees, and you just let people fight with each other, you don't have competition. What you have is chaos. So I don't think about competition. I think about, and one other thing I'll add to that. The other thing I learned from myself is that my competitive urge really was derived from trying to fill a hole inside myself, trying to feel self-worth. And maybe if they win this and I win that and I do that and I do that, maybe then I'll feel fulfilled. And it can't happen. You can never fill an inner space with an externality. It doesn't work. So from my perspective, it's better to step back and say, how can I serve people? How can I engage in practices that fulfill me so I don't need to compete? I don't need to prove myself to anybody. And how can I make the world a better place everywhere I go? And think along those lines. And I don't define success the way that most people. I define success in terms of how many people have I served this week? How many people already? This is Wednesday. I've already served 5 or 6 people this week.
You've served me.
I mean, everybody in the audience.
Right.
How many people have I served? Yeah. And that's not being competitive. That's just thinking about what's the higher purpose in my life. And so that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. And I appreciate that so much, because one of the most beautiful things that's come out of the show over its, we've just hit 6 years, so when we first started, and it's actually hard for me not to get a little emotional because it's part of my journey, it's part of my story. But when we started, I was that guy trying to fill that hole. Yeah. I thought, hey, let's just bring people on that know what it means to win. And you'll see that. You'll see that in my first 20, 30, maybe even 40 episodes. You'll see a lot of people that you look at them and you go, oh, yeah, competitor. No doubt, competitor. And the beauty of this work that we've done on the show is that it's allowed me to meet enough folks like yourself, Doug, who have educated me, helped me grow, helped me evolve to realize that while that word competitor still remains in the name of the show, the definition of what it means in the essence of this show has evolved, in that we are pursuing our best self. We're pursuing our optimal self. And that even brought me into the business that I have today started from that very evolution that I went through because of this podcast, and that's when everything that we've been speaking through in this discussion, I think at the heart of that word emotion, it's a funny word for a lot of people. It gets people really uncomfortable. But what's funny is when I actually come from that guy 6 years ago that I was to where I am today, while I've evolved in so many ways, the greatest way I would argue that I've maybe evolved is how I've allowed my emotion to remain at the surface and get to know it. I've gotten to know my emotional state. I've become so much more present with that version of me. And I love that version of me. I love that guy who's just like, hey, if you're feeling vulnerable right now, let's jump right into a big pool of vulnerability. And if you're feeling
Exactly.
right. So like, why not? Like, what else have we got to lose by doing that? And that is where, for me, myself, how I've grown and how this show has certainly grown too.
Right. I teach my clients that emotions are your superpower. When you have emotional tools like affect labeling, you can walk into any room, you can walk into any situation, and know exactly what to say and how to say it from a place of inner calm, compassion, and confidence, and know exactly what's going to happen in the next moment.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool thing to be able to do. And that's because we have emotional mastery.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, as we speak today, it's May 15th. May 15th as we record this today. It's probably going to be a solid month or so after this is actually out. But just yesterday, I was in a room with an entire executive team, and it was an emotional room. There was a lot of emotion around that room. And part of this, I don't want to get lost, is how you reference peacemaker and mediator. The mediator part, I think, is this: while we lead with the peacemaker, the mediation part of this is also a really important thing to underline here, is that as I was in that room just yesterday, and as so much of this work that you preach is very fresh in the front of my mind right now, as I listen to this book everywhere I go, I can't help but think how focused I was yesterday simply on people's emotions. And I was making some notes. I was putting down some stuff that people were saying. So in a way, I was kind of going against step one, but I was prioritizing the emotional state in the room. That was my primary focus yesterday. And I found myself show up as a coach and as a mediator specifically in a way that I've probably never done before. And it was, I came home and even told my wife, I said, today was a reaffirming day for the work that I do, because I felt like I was doing it at a level I've never done it before.
Right. That's exactly right. And you probably saw things in that meeting that you had never seen before.
Yeah.
Then have an understanding, oh, this is why these people are so dysfunctional. This is what's going on. They're not listening to each other. That's why they're emotional. Nobody's being heard. Nobody feels heard. So they're all yelling at each other, trying to feel heard. They're like 6-year-olds.
It can get that way. It can get that way. But I think the most important thing before I make the mistake of this turning into a coaching session where you're coaching me on certain stuff, because I definitely feel it moving in that direction. What I will say is this: I think this work that you're alluding to here, man, it's something that for you to provide us these steps, I think is so powerful for anybody listening. Hey, you've got your 1, 2, 3 right there. If you didn't catch it, go back and get it about 10 minutes ago. So skip back, go get it, get a pen if you didn't have your pen, and write that down. Secondly, Doug, what I want you to do here, if you wouldn't mind, is just maybe just leave our listeners with that true why, because so much of what we've discussed here, you've talked a lot about your why. You've talked a lot about the how, in terms of how we can certainly apply this. But when you speak to that mission that you have for us to be picking up these pebbles of peace and throwing it in the ocean, why should for lack of a better way of asking it, why should people care? Why should people want to do this very work that it is that you're promoting here?
Well, I guess it depends on how happy you want to be in your life. If you want to consistently have fights and arguments, you want to be conflict avoidant and avoid difficult conversations, you don't want to have a deep, intimate relationship with your partner, you don't want to have a deep, intimate relationship with your children, you don't want to have the confidence and compassion to be able to deal with any situation, no matter how intense, then don't do this work. It's that simple. But if you want to become a full, whole, functioning human being, using every aspect of you, both your cognitive and your emotional self, then this is the work that you need to do to develop that to its highest potential.
Fortunately, you're on a show where the podcast is much more the latter, if not all the latter. And if you're unable to resonate with that as something that you want to commit to, then you probably listen to the wrong show. I'm not sure why you're listening, because that's what we're all about on this show. Doug, The generosity of insight here has just been endless. We could probably go another 45 minutes, quite frankly. But I'm just excited for me and my own personal journey, just to almost be selfish here for a moment. Like, I'm excited to keep applying this work that you're preaching. And I'm excited to continue listening to your wife speak through your book. And in the meantime, for anybody that's listened to this, that's thinking, hey, how can I myself start to really get into the weeds with this work in more detail? Where might be a good place to send people to access that?
Well, you can always email me at Doug Noll, NOLL.com. I'm solo, so I don't have a staff. I answer all my own emails. My website is DougNoll.com, which has a ton of resources. My YouTube channel is called The Power of Emotional Competency, and there are 200 YouTube videos talking about all this stuff, giving demonstrations. And I also have a de-escalate dojo that I do every Thursday from noon to 1 Pacific, where people come in to a Zoom call and we practice affect labeling. It's pure dojo, pure sparring, and try to create as much. For beginners, we keep it easy. For the more advanced people, we make it pretty hard, where we're springing at each other.
Yeah.
And how well can you stay centered and reflect? So if people are interested in getting into the dojo, email, we can talk about that. Same for you if you want to, Steve. I have online courses, obviously the book De-escalate, which you can get on Amazon. And then I offer workshops and one-on-one coaching and training for individuals, couples, and teams. The typical stuff. Only I'm very narrow. I'm not an executive coach. I'm not a life coach. Mm-hmm. All I do is teach people how to listen.
Yep. Well, can't recommend the book enough. If you haven't picked up on the fact that I'm a fan of the book yet, I am. The whole dojo thing, you'll probably be hearing from me. I love a good workout. I've never heard a workout offered like that before, so I'm in. But more than anything, for all the listeners, all this information is going to be provided in the show notes, so you can access all of that information. But Doug, again, thank you in abundance for your time. Please continue doing this work. I am someone, thanks to our introduction, who's now picking up that pebble and throwing it in. I'm excited for more of our listeners to take up that same assignment and see if we can start working on peace.
Very good. Thank you, Steve.
And my thanks again to Doug for joining us on the show. Golly, there's so many things I could point out as a food for thought as we close out here, but the one thing I have to just go to, just to kind of capture so much, if not everything that we spoke about here, is the importance of our emotions. Folks, we have to get so much clearer on the power that our emotions have and the role that they play within how we show up and do what it is we do within our careers and within our lives. This insight that Doug provided and all the work that he's been doing now for 2.5 decades around this, it's proving that there are methods for us to communicate at significantly higher levels, but to also do it in a way where we're just simply acknowledging that we care about the person that we're communicating with as well. We want them to feel better. We want them to get through whatever this emotional state they maybe are experiencing that's in that moment in time, preventing them from being in the right frame of mind. And wouldn't it be a wonderful world to live in if we could just all find a way to get through some of the anger sometimes, some of the frustration, the animosity that we have towards a situation or another, and just recognize emotions and then have much more meaningful conversations because we were just simply willing to press pause, not make it about us for a moment, and just focus on resolving some of the emotional conflict or inner emotional struggle that one person may be going through. So let's get in touch with our emotions, people. It's a powerful resource for us, if not our most powerful resource, is to simply not only recognize we are emotional beings, but that we can control our emotions, that we can become more aware of them, and that we can use this information to just simply give ourselves a more competitive advantage on how to live life at an optimal standard. Never mind your career, this is about how we live our lives. So again, so appreciative of Doug. Definitely encourage everybody to either go pick up a copy of the book, or download it and listen to it the way I do. But either way, it's going to be filled with insight that I know will be of benefit to anyone who's willing to give it a read, give it a listen. In the meantime, folks, hey, make sure you're clicking that 5th star if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you're subscribing to the show. Make sure you're sharing the show as well with anyone within your world that you know can benefit from this truly impactful and empowering insight that came in this episode and so many other episodes that we've had come out throughout the course of this year. We're right at the halfway point now of 2024. So excited about where we are as a show. The show is truly exploding, become a top 50 self-improvement podcast on the planet now, which is huge. And that means that the content is just fantastic, but it also means that people are listening to it. And I just appreciate you being one of those people that is taking the time to listen to the show. Please continue to be a fan of the show, but continue to reach out and let me know how we can continue to make it better as well. Steve at careercompetitor.com is one way that you can get in touch with me, And so make sure you're making that effort to do exactly that. But otherwise, just a big thank you for being part of this community that is Career Competitor. And as always, best of luck with anything and everything that you've got going on within your world. I look forward to doing this again with you very soon. Bye for now.